Thanks for following us along our journey here on how to install an IKEA kitchen. We're on part 5. Today we're going to go through the finishing touches. We're going to go through the cabinet over the fridge. One mistake that I made earlier in my planning, that'll show you that. We'll just discuss the range hood behind me. We'll show you how to build a jig and install the door handles and all the pulls, the filler panels on the back of the island or the peninsula, and the toe kick. So we'll just give you lots of tips. And we'll also do the brackets, the corbels, and a few ways that you can do the corbels or brackets on an island. So let's jump into it. Over here, we have the cabinet that's gonna go in for the above the fridge. What I did there is I just took the height of the regular uppers, made this one to match. But as you can see, I've put these 3/4 inch basically fillers in. And what I've done there is, if you measure the opening is, let's just say roughly, well, it's 39 inches and our cabinet is 36. So we have 1.5 inches of filler on each side. Now, because this cabinet is only 20 inches high, but it's also 2 feet deep, I always find that they kind of sag down. So these brackets or filler panels, whatever you want to call them, they're there so that I can get it level and I have something to fasten to. So what I'll do is I'll get this cabinet into place. I just wanted to show you that. Then whatever thickness of material I need, it's very close to 3/4, I might have to go 5/8. I can slip a little panel into here, just snug enough so I don't bulge the side of my cabinet box, get it level, and then I can just screw into this and that'll hold it from sagging. Now usually the fridge is connected to either a pantry unit or a gable. So then if you had a gable, like a gable is just a panel that goes to the floor, well then that's what holds the cabinet up. You know what I mean? So either have a pantry or a gable that holds that 2-foot deep cabinet from sagging. But in this scenario, we don't have that luxury. I don't want to rely on the 2 little plastic stoppers that push against the back here. Over time, they'll either push a hole in the wall or, like I said, it'll just keep sagging. So that's just what we've done there. We'll get this cabinet up. And then really from there, it's just a matter of leveling it, screwing it, making sure that you have the shims. And then I've already shown you how to do the filler panels. So you can do the filler panels there. And then if you want to go custom and fill the gap between your fridge and the upper, then just do something similar to what we've done over here. And then that way it gives it a little more of that custom feel. So we've already done that. You know how to do that part of it. So that's one thing that we're going to go through. Over here, I want to show you what happened over here. And this is just a tiny little mistake. I should have caught it earlier. I should have been paying more attention. When we laid out all our cabinets, I laid out exactly 30 inches between here and here. Now that's a little, I should have went like 30 1/8 or 30 1/4. And the reason that is so that I want this countertop to be a little bit proud. The other thing that I noticed is when I gave all the dimensions for the countertops to the company who built them. And I noticed that there's a small discrepancy in this corner for square. So I wasn't sure how the range was going to fit in. So essentially at the end of the day, I just had to pull this cabinet off. I had to shave my base down. I just had to move everything over 1/4 inch. That way, at the end of the day, my countertop can be a little bit proud from the cabinet, but I still have my 30-inch opening. So just keep that in mind. When you're setting your bases and your cabinet boxes, just give yourself maybe 30 1/4 and then just a little allowance for your countertop to overhang. And that way, if things are a little bit out of square, like if it's overhanging 1/8 here and 1/16 back there, you'll never notice it, as long as when you push the range in or the stove, you know, all your lines are parallel and it looks good that way. Let's jump onto the range hood. We're not going to show the full install. I'll give you a bunch of tips on what I would do beforehand. Okay, so first thing, I even made some notes so that nobody forgets. We're going to end up tiling this right up to the ceiling. So yeah, we have to get all the tile done. right up to the ceiling before we can install anything. So first thing is verify that this wire location is at the proper height so that it works with the range hood that we bought. Now, if we have to cut a hole and move it up or down, no big deal. We can just patch it up with a chunk of drywall and tile over top. No harm there. The other thing is just pre-map out your stud locations. I've marked them out here. I'm gonna run a test screw in those, make sure that those are studs. Then I can just draw on a piece of cardboard, map out. So say, okay, from the left here at 1 1/4, there's a stud, 11 and 23 1/8. Then just later, if you can use those to mount, that's great. If not, then you have to use a Hilti plug or something along those lines. Before we tile, I noticed that one of the studs in the wall must have crowned, so we have a bit of a bulge there. I just labeled that so that when whoever's tile setting can grind that down, flatten it out, because we're doing a little bit of a subway effect. We don't want it to translate through and look goofy, so we got to just rasp that down. That's just something to be aware of. And then after the fact, when you're setting the range hood, the only way the best way to drill through a porcelain tile or glass or anything is with these monolith. They're carbide. They're basically a hole saw. Like the bigger you go, that actually is essentially a hole saw. So these will cut pretty much the only thing that'll cut through porcelain. And if you can drill through that, you can drill through anything. Natural stone, these would take like 3 seconds to go through. So I won't get into the crazy detail of how to use them, but essentially on your drill, you just start them at an angle, get a little bit of a groove, and then just straighten it out and go straight into the tile. So that's how you use those. But that's a good tip to know if you're drilling through tile and you're setting your range hood after that's all done. With this cabinet up, you might be able to visualize it better. I made sure, like I pre-hung this cabinet, made sure that when I put these brackets on, I wasn't going to interrupt my fillers that go in. And you got to just plan this out a little bit when you are doing your fillers. But essentially this, like, it'll probably be bigger than this at the end of the day. But I can fill something in there. I'd probably want to go further back so that when I do my filler, my L-tie for my filler, this is way back out of the way. But essentially that's what we're doing. Or there's a multitude of ways to get this supported, but essentially that's what it is. You can cut your own thickness to make sure the cabinet's centered, get this to fit snug, and essentially all you're doing is just gonna plug it through there. Whether you shim this or make this 7/8 or whatever you want to do, just lift the cabinet up, set it, and then it won't have that sag. But that just helps you visualize what we're doing there. So we're done with this. You guys can do that. I've already taught you well. One of the priorities for today is getting the panels on and the toe kicks so that when we can finish our baseboard, finish our painting and all that, and then the house is complete, right? And get the tile done. But I don't want to forget to show you guys this. We've kind of ran through this quick before. I've cut these filler panels, finish side down, finish side to the outside. So those will just fit in there. We'll tag those. I'll make sure that they're flush to the front. Then after I set these, we can set a baseboard at the back, but the biggest thing and the priority here is I like to silicone all that. Clean it up, give it a good silicone job. That way, if your dishwasher leaks, it forces the water out towards the front, and then you notice it, you have a leak right away, rather than it trickling into the basement or into your joists. So that's just something I didn't want to forget to tell you guys. As you can see, we have this panel set in place. It's not totally secured. I want to show you a few elements that's going on here. If you remember when we set our bases, we had to shim the bases up, which tells me that the floor is a little bit out of level. But what we've done is we've just shimmed this in place. This panel's just a little bit proud so that I don't see the cut edge of this panel. Now that it's the way we want it, what I had to do is I had to trace this out from the backside with my pencil. So I just scribed it. And then I just had to keep in mind that this part I want a little bit proud. That way when this toe kick goes over, you don't see this cut edge. Because if I cut this and it was too far that way, then you'd see a gap. So this is a little bit proud, which I wanted, and this is nice and flush. Now, I want to show you two methods of cutting with the jigsaw. So let me just grab a couple of different blades and show you a couple of different ways and things to be aware of. So on this scenario, because my pencil marks are on the back side, I have to put the good side down. And therefore, when I'm cutting with the jigsaw, they make your normal jigsaw blade is one of these. And it'll cut on the upstroke because the teeth are pointing up. And that's what I want. Because my good side's down, I want it to cut up, and I don't want it to push down and tear everything apart. So that's what I had to do there. But sometimes you actually have to use a reversed jigsaw blade, which is one of these. It'll cut on the downstroke. So if I was cutting this with the good side up, I'd want this downstroke so that it actually pushed the material down and doesn't pull it up and flake and chip all my edges, right? So that's just something to be aware of with that. Another thing that's happening here is we are just a tweak out of level. Now you have two options. I want to keep the factory edge to the ground. That way water, if somebody spills or whatever, the water doesn't soak up and wreck my panels, right? Now, if this is too far out of level, I wouldn't be able to do that. It would look goofy. Like I feel like the way this is gonna work, slightly out of level, I'd rather have a little discrepancy against my floor and have the factory edge down. But like I said, if it was too far out of level, we'd actually have to reverse it. We'd have to do a taper cut. And the taper cut you'd have to do similar to when we did that one filler panel where you have to do it with a straight edge and a skill saw and set it crooked and cut it crooked. This way we're gonna do our cut edge to the top side. I'm gonna set this panel now, and then we're gonna show you how to cross cut on a table saw and how to do it when this material is bigger or longer than your fence can handle on your table saw. So I wanna show you that. But let me set this panel 100%. And we'll do that. We had to pull all the drawers out in order to fasten these panels on. Now you'll probably remember we have this panel, which is about 1/8. Then we filled it with 3/8 plywood, and then we have our finished panel at the back. And if you remember, we pre-drilled all our holes, so we're set. It'll be easy to fasten. I will have to have someone's help just pushing the panel in as I screw it. Now this is a critical point where I need to plan what size of fasteners I'm going to use and what style. So I want to show you what to think about. Hopefully I can visualize this for you. Here's the back panel. I should have about 1/2 inch over here. I thought at first I could use 1 1/8" screw. I don't believe I can, and I'll show you why. I would like some safety gap. Let's see here. I want that back just enough so I don't poke through. And then if I measure this, I have about 9/16. So if I need to set this screw flush at 1/2 inch, that tip of that screw is literally gonna almost poke through the panel. So 1 1/8", I'm gonna say no way, we're not using that. Now I have a choice between a flathead 1 inch, a 1 inch should work. Kind of set it the same way. Measure this, now I have 7/16. So this should work, because if it's 1/2 inch and it sits flush, I have, a good safety gap, about 1/8 inch. One thing you want to be aware of is I might actually use pan heads. So a pan head is measured from the base of this, the base here to the tip is 1 inch. Whereas as a flathead is 1 inch from the head to the tip. You can see that, which makes sense, right? They're 1 inch. So I think I'm going to use pan heads and it'll work out. But just be careful. Don't start firing screws through and blasting holes out the other side. So we'll get this first panel set here. One more thing that I've planned out is after we get some panels on, if we find that it's too flimsy or we don't like how it's fitting, you can just do an L bracket like this up against the cabinet sides. So this one I could put at the bottom And then I could even just pull it in, like I could pull it in towards us a little bit. And then when I suck everything, it'll pulls everything right tight to the actual base. And I could do those up the sides or something like that. So that's just kind of a backup plan if things aren't feeling the way I want them to do. That first panel's set here. And we have the second one just sitting there. Because the floor is at a level, it doesn't look, I don't think you'll ever notice that. It's small enough that we can get away with it, but you just got to be aware of things you can get away with and things that you can't. Now, this panel is loose, like I said. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to shim it up a little bit just to kind of match what I've done here. But before we set this, I want to show you how I got the dimension and how to cut this panel. We'll just slide this over a little bit. So whenever you're measuring in a tight spot like this, rather than measuring like this and trying to guess as your tape rolls, it's hard to tell what the exact measurement is. So what I've done is I'll just mark just a random number, something that's easy to add. I'll just go 10 inches. So that's 10. And then I measure from the floor. So 24 and 9/16, so I'm 34 9/16. Now I want to measure that a little bit over too. So our panels are 26 wide. So you can see I've made some marks already over here. So I've made my 10-inch mark. Oops. And it's the same. So 34 9/16. So how do we cut something like that? My table saw can only cut 24 or 24 3/4. How do I cut a panel like that on a table saw? And I'll show you how that's done. We're going to use a white panel just so you can see the pencil marks better. It's the same height as our regular 26 by 36 panels. So I'm just going to measure my 34 9/16. Right like that. Then I can just basically reverse table saw it, or just reverse how I'm going to do it. So that's 1 7/16 inches to that line. Now, when you're spinning things like that, you got to keep in mind that the 1 7/16 inches is to this side of the blade. And I'll show you why. Because as you cut it, you can see the blade width. Normally you measure from the inside of the blade to your fence, but now you got to measure to the outside so that when it cuts it, your saw blade's actually on this side of that pencil mark. So it's 1 7/16 inches to the other side of the blade, which is just kind of against the norm, but you just got to be aware of that small difference. So once I set that, then what I can do, I won't do it now, but you can just turn the table saw on, make a little incision, make sure that you're bang on to your mark, and if you're not, then just adjust it and push it through. Because if you push this all the way through and you have to take a 16th off, you can't. Now the other method to cut these, like if you got to do a taper cut, is just do the table saw with the clamps and the straight edge. So there's a couple ways to cross cut these. One more point on cross cutting. If you have a panel, let's say it's only like 8 or 10 inches wide and really long, advise against that. Either use a miter saw or the skill saw method, because cross cutting long narrow strips is dangerous. So just be aware of that. Don't do anything scary. And yeah, we'll just finish these panels off now. What I'm doing, I'm making sure that all my screws are 1 inch, because heaven forbid if one was longer like this one. That's 1 1/4 inches. So I gotta throw that in the garbage. So I'm just doing my due diligence, making sure I don't mess my project up. Gotta have them all 1 inch. Yeah, perfect. We're at a point now where we've fastened it from the inside right here, and we need to fasten it over here. Now that's inside of our corner cabinet, so the length of the screw is going to change. This is a 3/4 inch thick panel, and these are 5/8. So use an 1 1/8 screw. Yeah, I just wanted to show you that little difference, just going from different backs and different thicknesses over to this. We just change our screws. But when we can actually manipulate these, how flush they are from the inside, by just how much we tighten the screw. We can tighten, you know, this side to suck it in, or we can crack this loose, and then these all end up just perfectly flush. So you can see how well it looks already. The panels aren't perfectly clean, but you can see how factory joint against factory joint, you don't really know where they are. You can't tell that they're there. So one last step before we finalize these panels is I wanted to make sure they didn't have any sponginess, or they want to make sure they were sucked tight to the base. So let me show you how I did that on the inside. So I just set this L bracket in the corner, but I set it back just a little bit further this way, so that when I set this screw, it really sucked it in tight to the base. So that's how I just kind of made sure everything was solid, but it's pretty much good to go. I can put my drawers back in, and we'll get onto some toe kicks. Couple things left. Back panels are secure 100%. Now we need to do some brackets to hold this eating bar up so it doesn't sag over the years. Now there's a couple of ways you can do this. I've done it lots in the past, where I take whatever IKEA panel that I have, whether it's the gray or the off-white or even the wood, and you buy a preformed corbel or a bracket. You got to go to a paint store and get stain to match or paint to match. If it's paint, you got to get high gloss and try to get it as close as possible and just paint those up. In this scenario, I'll show you how to build your own brackets out of the IKEA filler panel material. So it's kind of, I just want to put it on there so you know it as an option. It's possible to do. You don't have to do the messing around and getting a bunch of paint and stain matched up. So it may not be the fanciest, but the way we do it, it still looks professional at the end. So at the end of the day, what we want is we want a bracket to hold this up. Something like a so. But I can't do it that thick. I need it wider so I can fasten it from the inside, the same fashion that we put the panels on. But just so you know, I've made a little drawing, and I'll pull that out. But essentially, this is a 90-degree angle. I just figure out what length I want that. For a 45, if this is 9 inches and this is 9 inches, this ends up being 12 3/4. You can do the math, or it doesn't matter how you do it. So really, with these, I'm gonna have 2 of them book matched together. So I have a finished outside. Then I've kind of pre-cut this piece. This is gonna go down the middle, and I cut it just a hair shorter so that I don't see the cut edge. And I do something like that. So we'll build this for you. Then I have this plywood I have to just brad nail this all together. So I have to just finish cutting some of this plywood. And I like having this material, so that way when this is all built, I'll do a layout. I'll figure out how many brackets I want, how far apart. Then with the plywood being on the back and here, I can either glue it to the underside, and I can fasten it from the inside. So I just be careful in how I lay it out, and then just screw it from the back. Now, one thing you could do is figure out your locations. Actually pre-drill a hole this way in the center of your bracket. That way you see those holes on the inside of the cabinet, and it's a surefire way you're not gonna miss the bracket and poke a hole out. So, but yeah, I'll show you how I built these. Yeah, so I did a little drawing so I could visualize it better, and I did the math so I knew what I was doing. But that way you know, okay, when I'm doing panels, I want this side panel and this side panel out of the 1/2 inch material. And then the filler in the middle I want out of 5/8. just there's more meat to brad nail too. So just a little pre-thinking there. All right, so let's go over to the miter saw where I have a little setup going. So I have this panel and I've ripped it down in a way that when I do a 45 on the miter saw, that my blade can actually cut it. It's a little deeper than it needs to be, but then all I have to do is now I have a good finished side and I have my finished front that I need. So then I just do a cut and I'll cut it this way. I don't want to create a bunch of sawdust here for the camera. So let's say this is my tip, then I just measure over the 12 3/4, and is that measurement doesn't matter as long as it's the exact same for each one. So I just mark 12 3/4 and I'd make a mark right on the face. You won't be able to see that, but then when I cut and miter it this direction, when I go, I just make sure that my saw blade totally cuts that pencil line off. So I can cut it long, like let's just pretend I'm cutting, and I just, okay, I need to shorten it up. I move it, do a slice, move it, do a slice. And then as soon as my blade's taken off that pencil mark, I make my cut, and that's how I end up with this. Once you have that, it's pretty easy sailing from there. Then I just figure out what width I want it. Then I just rip a bunch of 5/8 panel and a bunch of 3/4 inch plywood to fill it up, to give it that space, and then we can start brad nailing it together. If you want a fancier bracket or a different style, like let's say you wanted to only go 6 inches this way and 12 inches down, then you can't do those cuts on a miter saw, or maybe you can, it's hard to say, but just another method you can do is this miter gauge. So if you wanted to do something different, you just set the miter gauge however you want, and then you just do a bunch of cuts. Once you cut those, and then you make, as long as your bracket's 90, it's just another way of doing it. You don't have to do it on the miter saw, or if you want different angles, you can do it a different way. Just thought I'd throw that out there, but let's get these together. So before you start nailing, just make sure that you book match them and that they're the right lengths and everything, otherwise they'll be all twisted up. So I just make sure fronts are flush, these two sides are flush, which they are. Then I'll probably go and brad nail this thing on. Now I would advise cutting extra material. Like making sure that you cut 2 or 3 extra sets, because if my brad nailer, like this is my only set right now, so if it blows a nail out of the side, I'll have to redo this, but this is just so you get the gist of it. These will have to be deadly flush. Yeah, so the only drawback to this system is it's easy, but you have those brad nails and you got to fill them or deal with those. So it's not like you wouldn't do this in a $2 million home, but it's just to show you what's capable, what you're capable of. And then with these plywood ones, I just kept them back a bit. I'll probably put this longer one on the back. So one's 7 inches. So it doesn't really matter, I can spin them anyway. I just kept it back. Like I didn't go, like I could have mitered these, and you can, if you want to go, you know, that extra step, just miter them, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm just keep it simple. But I'm gonna go nice and flush to the top here. Now this one, I'm gonna push right back against this one. As you can see, that way this is a tight connection. You can brad nail it like this. Right. So here's my IKEA filler panel corbel that we've made. And let's just throw it up underneath and see what it's going to look like. Yeah, so we have a bunch of those. And they fit nice. They look good. And yeah, they're simple. You can do it. You don't have to do any special paint matching. And we'll just decide if we want 4 or 5, and we'll figure out a spacing and we'll get them installed. Now let's do some toe kicks. And this is, I think it's fairly simple. I've explained it already. Just make sure you plan your cuts so that you always have this end cut that's finished. So in this scenario, this is probably the trickiest one of the day. This one has to be exact height. Finished edge here, finished edge on the bottom. Then I have a cut edge, which will be on the left, but we'll show you how I'll remedy that. But here, this has to be exact height so that I don't see a gap there and I don't see a gap down there. Now normally you can cut your toe kicks a 1/16 less so you're not fighting with them getting in, because you'll never actually see that gap, but you will see it here. So I had to do precision cut there. Now because this is proud of my actual base, I have no gapping, and even though this is a cut edge, the edge tape is thick enough that I just protruded a hair and it looks good. Then on the left side here, I also am a little bit proud, but what I'm gonna do to keep things fancy, I'm gonna use some of this Titan, it's subfloor adhesive. It's basically adhesive in a can. It's actually really great stuff. I'm not gonna get into it now. I'm just gonna glue the bottoms. Well, I'm gonna glue the whole thing. That way I only need to brad nail the top, and that way you won't see any nails down low. I just gotta be careful here. So yeah, this is a collapsing foam, but it works. It's amazing stuff. Yields huge in the can and bonds really well. I'll just do an extra bead on the bottom just to be safe. There, and then all I have to do is brad nail the top, and you'll never see those. You can see that. So now I just got to overhang this one with a finished edge and run it this way. So on this stretch, I used the 15 by 90 panels and ripped them to the 4 1/4. This stretch is longer than 90. So what I did is I just took an extra panel, and that's why it's good to just buy lots, is I just took a 30-inch panel. So it has a finished edge here and a finished edge here. That way, when I can butt 2 finished edge together, same as what we did on the back panels, and you won't see a joint along here. So yeah, I'll just put this in here, glue it in, brad nail at the top, then I'll have a finished edge here, and then on the inside corner is where I'll have my cut. So here will be a cut edge. That's fine. This is in place, so I just need to have a factory here and a factory on the bottom, and it's simple. I have no weird cut edges, and I just basically, at the end of the day, I just have to plan and basically chase myself around the room, and that's how the toe kicks get done. Measuring this toe kick, I almost made the mistake of measuring it to this toe kick, but I actually want to measure it to the cabinet so there's no gap in between the dishwasher and the actual cabinet box. So I'll just butt it in, and I'll do a 25 7/8. So a little trick, if you don't want to brad nail the bottom, just put a little piece of tape and just give it some good tension and tie it back, and that'll hold the bottom tight until the glue sets up. The last step is to show you how to install the handles, the pulls, and the hardware. So these go there, all the drawers. What I like to do is I like to build a jig. So I build one for the doors, and then I build one for the drawers. And I'll show you how we do that. First of all, what placement do you want the handles? So sometimes what you do, like in this scenario, what I did is the screw hole lines up with this line here. Because sometimes what you'll do is you'll put the screw hole center of, let's say, this square. But that doesn't work, because if I do that, I'm actually sticking past the bottom. So we thought these would look good, screw hole in line with there. What I do is I just measure that. That's 2 13/16. At the end of the day, my jig is made so that it's reversible. So if I go like this, I make it flush to the bottom. I do He-Man grip, and I drill it out. Let's do it right now. Super flush. Let's drill it. And then it's reversible, like I said, so it doesn't matter if I turn it and flip it, or if I turn it and flip it this way, or if I flip it like that, doesn't matter. As long as I'm flush on the bottom of the doors, the measurements are all the same. And this is gonna save you oodles of time. Now every kitchen that I do, I have to build new jigs because there's different handles, different spacings. The placements are always different, so I just build a jig new every time. So how did I get there? I knew that this was 2 13/16. So I measured in here 2 13/16. Then the other end, it's still the same, 2 13/16 to the center. Then all I did, you can do it one of two ways. You can physically measure it. I did both. I measured it, and once you have one line, you just line up on your marks and just make your marks. Then the other thing is, when I build these, I build it so that this is 3/4 of an inch, the same thickness as a door or a drawer. And that way, when you open that right up, it's nice and flush on the backside, and I can just get a good grip on it, that's all. What else about this jig? Right, and then you just got to center it between here and here. So you just figure out that, and that's your measurement from here to the center is where you want it in there. So when you put it up like this and you drill those, it works out. So that's the doors. So that really, I can just go around, do any door in this style and this handle, and I can just go to town. I don't have to measure 2 bazillion times, okay? Now I make a separate jig for my drawers. Now this one, you'll have to have a center line. And in this scenario, all our drawers are 10 inches. So I don't have to worry about different heights of drawers. But what I would do is, right here, I have the 10-inch drawer line. So that could also be called like a medium height drawer. If I had the 5-inch, which are the lows, the 10s, and then the 15s are the big bottoms, I would just have my marking. I would have rough, I'd have a 5-inch or a low, and then I'd have a mark for my high or my 15-inch drawer, right? So in this scenario, we want the cabinet handles in the center this way. And it all depends on your preference. You could put it in the middle of this if you want. So it'd be there, there, and there. But in this case, we'll do them in the middle, middle, middle. So same thing, I make it so that it's perfectly centered. And this one actually make a center line mark and actually transfer that all the way through to the back side. The reason I do that is so that when I throw it up onto this drawer, then all I have to do is find dead center of this drawer and just make the tiniest little tick right there. Then I line that up. Then I know, in this case, it's so easy because they're all the same. But you just go in the middle. But if this top drawer is usually low, make sure you're on your low setting, drill those holes. So the only other thing I'd say about this is make darn sure that you're centered. So don't ever just do the math. Like these will always be a little bit, like this is a 36-inch drawer, but it's actually 35 7/8, which should be 17 15/16. But I'll make that mark 17 15, and then just measure the other way. Make sure you're the exact same. Make sure you're centered, because sometimes the math, you can kind of get goofed up on the fractions and you don't want to mess up. But the nice thing about IKEA, you go buy a $20 or $30 drawer front and you get the exact same thing. You can swap it out pretty easily. So if you do make a mistake, the IKEA system allows you to fix it easily. Now I just want to show you one other thing. Because all these drawers are 30 inches, except for the one we were just at, I did a little bit of a cheat mode, and I just made it so that I just line it up from these marks. So it's just a cheat way so I don't have to center it. So I just line that up on those marks, make sure I'm bang on, drill, drill, done. Once I get my mojo, I just fly around. In like 10 minutes I've drilled all my holes, and I don't have to measure with 10,000 times or a bajillion like I said last time. So that should cover all the jigs. Those will be very helpful for you. That essentially finishes what we have to do today, besides just finishing the toe kicks, doing the tile backsplash, and just doing the finishing touches. You guys already know how to do that, but let's come back to it when it's all finished. Before we get to the very final shot of the kitchen 100% complete, let's just roll through some ideas and pictures from previous jobs. This one, you can see these are from some apartments that we've done where we've actually taken two of the different colors and combined them in a unique way to make it look super custom. This shot here shows how the uppers, we actually added some drawer units, and it goes and sits right down on the countertop, and it just adds a kind of a unique look and custom look. And then here's just a few other shots just to show you different ways that you can finish, maybe above a fridge or just different areas. Take a quick look. Now that you've watched the series, you can see where every kitchen that we do is custom, and all the, the ways that we finish it are all slightly different. But just take a look at those